very much for being part of the Douglas County Historical Society's video history series.
You're welcome.
I know that you sold fruits and vegetables out of the old market your entire life, actually mostly onions and potatoes.
Right.
You were known as the Onion King. And we want to get into all of that and talk about that, but before we do that, I want to get back to the very beginning. Your father was an immigrant, right?
Right.
Where did he come from?
He came from Russia, and the borders of Russia changed quite a few times, but he was born in the heart of the Ukraine.
And he came here why?
He came here because there was so much trouble there, discrimination, hate, no opportunities to make a living. There was anti-Semitism in a small town. And also they had rules. If you were a Jew, you could not buy land or farm unless you worked for somebody. And my dad and his dad were entrepreneurs. They liked to buy, they liked to sell, and it interfered with his future.
And your dad was how old when he came?
He was about 19.
About 19 years old. And he came, and I know that he worked for a little while in New York.
Right.
But then he was lured to Omaha. Tell me how all that happened.
Well, in New York, there were jobs available, and there was chance to be self-employed. But without any money, you have to go to somebody who does. And some of the people that he knew gave him an opportunity to go in business for himself. I think they lended him some money, I don't know how much. But he decided that he was going to buy some scrap cloth and textile from the clothing industry there that was one of the biggest in the world. So he'd buy what they call mill ends, big bolts of cloth where the manufacturer would make dresses and things like that. And after the orders were taken up and turned into items, Dad would buy what was left over. Sometimes it was 100 yards, sometimes it was 1,000 yards. So no matter how much they had, he would buy it and resell it to smaller places that had cloth for sale and things of that nature. So he was more or less a scrap business person, and he would virtually peddle it, kind of like Mrs. Blumkin from Nebraska Furniture Mart. He had a lot of guts. He'd knock on doors. He'd go see people. There'd be a sign, no solicitors. It didn't bother him. He'd walk right in. Anyway, so after a while, he found out that some of the guys from his small town returned to the Ukraine to finish up their business and sell off their farms or whatnot. And they're all coming in wearing a suit and a gold chain and watch. So he thought to himself, he told me, someday I'm going to have a suit and a gold chain and a gold watch. So he tells me that when he came over, that was his goal, and it didn't take him long, and he had the suit and a watch and the chain and had his picture taken. And he not only took a regular picture, but it was about this big, a huge picture, like a movie star. But other guys like him did the same thing. It wasn't nothing new. So that was his sign of achievement.
And he came to Omaha why?
Well, he came to Omaha because the Depression started to hit New York pretty bad.
Not the 1930s depression, but this is a depression before that.
Well, this was right. I don't know what they call it, but he told me that's the time where they had the soup kitchens going on. So he found out that there was a guy in Omaha that knew his father from the Ukraine. And this guy in Omaha, his name was Solomon Silverman. And he wrote to my dad and says, come to Omaha, plenty work here. Choose what you want to do. And if you don't have any money, we'll find it. So he came in to visit. And the guy that invited him turned out to be my grandfather because he had a beautiful daughter. And when my dad saw the daughter, he decided, I think I'm going to live in Omaha. And I'm not going to let this girl get away from me. And he started to date my mom. And he found out that my grandpa was in the produce business because he would buy fruits and vegetables from farmers and go from house to house and business to business and offer his wares. So
That's what your dad started doing.
that's what he started doing because he already knew how to handle horses and wagons. And buying and selling, it was a piece of cake for him.
And where did he live?
He lived at on 18th Street, about 18th in Chicago. Had a small house.
But he had to have some place for the horse.
Grandpa had a barn behind where he kept his horse. So when Dad bought a horse and a wagon, Dad got most of the money from some of the peddlers. They didn't call them competitors because there was room for everybody. We didn't have too many grocery stores either, and they weren't chains, no Hy-Vee or nothing like that. It was just a corner grocery store, and the man and wife and his kids lived in the back room. So
Your wife, so your dad now, he's got the wagon, he's got the horse, and he buys fruits and vegetables. He buys them from wholesalers in the old
Wholesalers,
market.
that's
Is
right,
that right?
that's right.
And then he just travels the neighborhood selling. How did that work?
Knocking doors, just take a different route all the time, and if you found one route that some people were looking for you all the time, then he gave that priority, and people would be able to get produce fresh and a lot cheaper than the grocery stores. So he was an entrepreneur, and he found that once in a while he'd find a commercial account like a company who makes potato chips. And they wouldn't buy 100 pounds of potatoes. They're looking for about 1,000 pounds or whatnot. So he found out that saves a lot of time going to these guys and knocking on all these doors and having to fight off all the barking dogs. He had teeth marks on his ankles from the dogs that are biting him. So he more or less stayed in the fruit and vegetable business, and his suppliers were the wholesalers in the old market.
But he became a wholesaler himself.
He
right?
did, because in the wintertime his stuff would freeze on that wagon, and in order to keep him from freezing, he went to the Salvation Army, and he got some of these secondhand rugs and threw the rugs over the top of the produce, and the rug had enough insulation in it that it's equal to insulation. I don't know what the R rating was, but it was okay. And he just kind of moved into that business.
And you came along here at some point. When were you born?
1924.
Was your dad at that point still using the horse and wagon to deliver fruits and vegetables?
The answer is no, because he got so much business that the horses would get tired of going back and forth to the market, so he got himself a pickup truck, and the truck would give him about 20 times as much territory to cover, and stuff didn't freeze in the truck. He'd also cover stuff up.
Did you accompany him on any of these trips?
Only until I got into grade school.
When you got in grade school, what would you do with him?
Well, first of all, grade school, it's closed on Saturdays and Sundays. So Dad would work Saturdays also. Now, I found that as a kid, I didn't have anybody to do anything with. In the Ukraine, they didn't have football, baseball, basketball. If you wanted to fool around, you got on the horse, run the horse, take a ride, see the sights, make your own toys. So he really wasn't into sports at all. So where the other kids, my neighbors, their fathers would take them to Creighton, where Creighton had a football team then. And once in a while they'd let me come along. And since I didn't have enough money to get in, they showed me how to sneak in. In fact, I snuck into about every theater in downtown Omaha, especially the Orpheum. The Orpheum Theater still has some doors on the side towards Harney Street. You take a coat hanger, put it between the two doors, hook up the coat hanger on the inside, and then pull it, and that door would swing open, and me and 3 or 4 of my buddies would just fly in there, sit down, and watch a free movie.
You never got caught?
No, because we would pick up the stubs from somebody who paid. They'd throw them in the cigarette thing because you couldn't smoke in the theater. So we just pick up these stubs and keep them. And if somebody says, "You got a stub?" I said, "Sure." I give them a stub, and they says, "Okay." And that was it. So it's a long time before I started paying my way to get in a theater.
But you were working with your dad to a certain extent on Saturdays,
Right. So my dad would take me down to the market and show me where he also had a couple stalls that he'd leased from the city. And he'd show me how to sell, show me how to buy, show me how to make change. And by the way, the cash register was our pocket. First of all, we didn't have a table to put the cash register on if we even had one. But the putting it in a pocket seemed to be very handy until we started to wear out the pockets from the change going in. And every once in a while, pocket would wear out and change would come right down my shorts into my shoes. And that was the humor of the day in the market, till my mom got some heavy twill to make pockets with. And before she found that, she used these coin bags that the banks would have, where you could put your change in a kind of a blue jean type material, and keep that inside your pocket. But it was rather cumbersome, but we didn't mind. All I know is he showed us how to buy, showed us how to sell.
How old are you then at about that time?
About 10 or 12.
And so you are accompanying your dad on some of these trips when he sells, but you also had a stall in the old market, right? Tell me about that.
Well, the city owned the sidewalks around the perimeter of the market. And that area was across from Upstream Brewery, or Upstream Restaurant, at 11th and Jackson. And on the corner there was a free water fountain that you'd step on a pedal and you'd get some cool water to drink. And Dad leased out 2 stalls and had to stand on the concrete all day long, and didn't have much shade. I'd come home and my neck was red in the back, and we didn't know about sunblock and all that stuff.
Who are you selling to?
General public. Sometimes my school teachers would shop.
So they would come down, they would buy from you, and you got the produce that you sold from your dad.
Yep, he was a wholesaler, so how can you beat that?
And then what you didn't sell could go back to him again.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now you told me, I know you were a great marketer, and when you were trying to sell some of this stuff, you had some songs that you would sing, and how did that go?
Well, like I saw what my dad did. When we had watermelon, he would say, "Watermelon, watermelon, get your red, ripe, and sweet watermelon." Okay, people walking by, stop. Let's take a look at this kid's watermelon. And all of a sudden, starting to sell, take in some money, and then we'd have strawberries. Strawberries, strawberries, get your red, ripe, and sweet strawberries. I got good at it. Now, I wasn't the only one that did that. Some of the other guys my age and some of the older guys and some of the women that work with their husbands would do the same thing. Then comes the complaints to the city hall. The market master would come down, and he's the guy that collected the monthly fee for having those stalls. He'd say, "You guys, you're going to have to stop shouting like that, and from now on, I don't want to hear a peep because we're getting complaints from people. It's too noisy down here." Well, we said, "Yes, sir, yes, sir," and then he'd go away.
And you'd be back to it.
As soon as he got up to the end of the block, "Watermelon, watermelon, we got watermelon." He kept on going because couldn't stop us. We were making a living that way, you know, and you have to call attention to yourself. Anybody that doesn't talk, doesn't sing, doesn't shout, they don't make any money.
Did you sell a lot of watermelons and
Did I? I
strawberries?
could
Doing
sell
that?
40,000 pounds of melons from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, go home, take a shower and a shave, and borrow my dad's car and go out dancing. And I looked just sharp as anybody. I bought really good suits. When my friends were out and dressing up, they didn't have a suit. So I'd go down to Nebraska clothing store, and I knew the sales guys there, and I told them what I wanted. And in those days, every department sold a different item. So there's one department that sells a suit. If you want a tie to go with it, you go downstairs, and he goes with me and he finds the right coordination, what kind of tie to wear, what kind of shoes to wear, what kind of socks to wear. He was my teacher. So when I pick up these girls, and I got a nice new car, my dad's, of course, they say, "Oh, George, what a great outfit you got. You're just sharp looking." Well, little did they know I had a trainer there who was the head of the clothing department at Nebraska Nebraska Clothing Company. So it was kind of a colorful life.
You're you're going to school. You went. Where did you go to high school?
I went to Tech High School. I graduated Tech 3 years.
And in all that time, you're working with your dad, watching what he does and how he does it and so forth. You're helping him. He's working out of the warehouse and selling to grocery stores and so forth.
The warehouse was right on 10th Street. It still is. I still own the building. It's between Harney and Howard on 10th Street. It's now, there's 2 sports bars in there. It's a street that's well-traveled. So I kept the building because the location was first class. It still is.
And you're selling, when you have the time to do it, out of this stall that is leased from the city. So now you've graduated from high school. What did you decide to do? Where did you go from there?
Well, World War II started. So I enlisted in the Army. I ended up in Europe. I came out of the Army as a tech sergeant.
What did you do when in the service?
8th Armored Division, 36 Tank Battalion. They sent me to some of the automotive schools also. If a tank broke down in combat or a vehicle, it was our job to either tow it back so we could fix it or fix it on site. On tanks, the tracks are metal. They'd fall off half the time. So we went out with a truck and we'd fix it or patch it up. And if we couldn't do that, we just left it there.
World War II ends. What did you do then?
World War II, I come back to Omaha looking for something to do. And I really wanted to be in the business my dad was, but he had a partner. His partner didn't want any more people in the business because he thought that since my dad had 2 boys and he had his partner and his wife had a boy and a girl, that we would kind of overpower him. So he said to my dad, we'll make an agreement. He says that we can't hire family people. So my dad didn't fight it because I wasn't insisting that my dad hire me. So I ended up going to California. And
that's where your brother was. He had
brother,
already gone to California.
Yeah, my
right?
brother was in California.
There were 2 of you. Yeah.
He had parking lots on a Miracle Mile. And I put an application into a company that made ham radios because I was very mechanically inclined. And I was doing really well there until my mother called me on the phone and said that Dad's partner got cancer and she needed me to come back because she had a hard time getting up at 5 in the morning, and she kept kosher, so eating in a restaurant was out of the question. So their whole house was having problems because nobody would bring them a meal or whatever. And the restaurants in the market were off limits because they weren't kosher.
Sure.
So I came back, and I could eat anything. I didn't obey all the rules because it's not very practical, especially when you're in the military. But anyways, Dad put me to work, and I show up with brown and white shoes and really business attire. So I said, what do you want me to do, Dad? He said, can you drive a truck? I says, I can drive a tank also. He says, we don't have any use for tanks here. He says, what about this 1.5-ton truck? I said, I can drive it. So he made me his truck driver. And I used to haul produce all around the area, including Council Bluffs. And he had one big customer in Council Bluffs. That was a People's Store, Council Bluffs. So on my way over, I would go by some other grocery stores. And I would take the truck, park it by the curb, go inside with a handful of potatoes and some onions and anything else on the truck. And whoever owned the store or was managing the store would say, what do you got? And I'd tell him. He said, where are you going with these? I said, I got about 3 or 4 other big stores in Council Bluffs. They're probably your competitors. He says, well, how much are they? And I'd give him a good price. He'd give me an offer. I'd give him a counter offer, and all of a sudden, I got an order here for him. And the next day, I bring stuff directly to his store. The store he had was, they call it Raj and Scotty. And he opened up another store later, and I got that store because we gave him excellent merchandise and at real low prices. And we weren't afraid to barter because everybody in the market bartered. Whatever price they ask is not the price they got. But that was the fun of it, see? Because you go into any store, like if you'd go into Nebraska Clothing and they want $150 for the suit, they don't want 125. They want 150. Without that, out you go. In fact, if I didn't have cash, they wouldn't let me open an account. So I always had cash because my pocket was my cash register. So that's the way we.
So you sold fruits and vegetables that same way.
That's right.
And the business grew. You and your dad grew the business that way.
Exactly, exactly. But we kept specializing in potatoes and onions. It was good items. They weren't very perishable. You didn't have to have a big cooler or anything like that. And we'd sell potatoes so fast they didn't have time to spoil. And then I started going after the processors, like Kitty Clover Potato Chip Company, Ideal Potato Chip Company, Mrs. Crocker's Potato Chip. Then we started expanding more so. I used to sell potato chip plants out of the state, all the way into New York, into California. And I was known as the largest supplier of potatoes and onions to the food industry in the United States and Canada.
That's where you got the name Onion King.
So, those that knew about my onion operation called me the Onion King. Those that knew about my potato operation called me the Potato King. So I was king of something no matter where I was, and proud of it. And then whenever we'd have a party in my home, the women would come up to my wife and say, "By the way, we love your house. What does your husband do?" She said, "Well, he sells onions." They said, "No, what does he do?" She says, "He sells onions." "Well, where does he sell the onions?" She said, "I'll let you talk to him. He's over there." So they come up to me and they say, "Mr. Eisenberg, your wife said that you could tell us where you sell onions, and that's your business. Is that true?" I said, "Of course." She said, "Well, where do you sell them?" So I wanted to joke around with her, and I said, "I got a basket, a market basket. I fill them up with onions, and I go up and down my neighborhood here, and I ring the doorbell." "Oh, really?" I says, "Yeah." She said, "Is there that much money in onions?" I said, "Well, it's said that I cry all the way to the bank."
You know, talking about that, you told me a story before about how your wife's father didn't really think that this was a great business to be in and wondered whether or not, I want my daughter to marry this guy.
Right.
Tell me that story.
Well, it's very simple. I started going with my wife, who was very talented. She went to Juilliard School of Music in New York, very bright girl, good with petit point and things like that. Much smarter than I, because to me, a bright woman is very sexy. She doesn't have to be a model, but if her head is good and she's fun, got a sense of humor, I don't need it anymore. Well, what happened is she introduced me to her father, was a tailor. He had a tailor shop in the military theater building towards Benson. So when I met him, he said to me, "Well, what do you do for a living?" So I said, "Well, at that particular time," I said, "I'm working with my dad." And he said, "What does your dad do?" He's a wholesaler of fruits and vegetables. So he says, "Can you make a living selling fruits and vegetables?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How much can you make?" I said, "Well, I'm self-employed. Depends on how good of a salesman I am." I said, "It's unlimited." So he says, "You have some machinery or things like that?" I said, "No, it's just my mouth and my head. That's it. And my cash register is my pocket." I said, "That's the way we work." So he kind of doubted, what I was saying, like I was pulling his leg, until I decided to propose to my wife, and she accepted. And then they sent a guy down from Dun and Bradstreet to check me out and my dad. The reason I know he was from Dun and Bradstreet is the same guy showed a movie in my father-in-law's home of him fishing up there near Lake Okoboji. And this guy walked with a limp. And I came back from Northrop Jones having lunch. And my dad said, there was a guy in here looking for you. He says he wanted to know a lot of personal things. He's from Dun and Bradstreet. I said, well, we don't file a report with Dun and Bradstreet. My dad says, I know. But he was very curious about you. I said, did he walk with a limp? He said, yes, he did. I said, my mother-in-law must have sent him because he's a friend checking up on me. I said, did you tell him anything? He says, I didn't have anything to tell him. I sent him back. I didn't want to join Dun and Bradstreet. I said, okay. So that night, I had a date with my wife, and I said, your mother's friend, the guy that walks with a limp, was checking me out. And I told her the story. And she said, well, that's just like Mama. So
They decided you were okay.
Yeah, I was okay, yeah.
So when did your dad retire, and did you buy the business from him? How did all that
Well,
work?
first of all, when I got married, I didn't just want to be an employee. So I said to my dad, your partner passed away. I like this business. Would you consider letting me buy a part of the business so I'd be a partner? So Dad looks me in the eye and he says, well, let me talk to Mother about it. So he talked to my mom. The next day at work, my dad says, we'll let you buy 25%. I says, okay, it's a deal. So I says, I don't really have enough cash to buy 25%. He said, you don't need any cash. He says, effective today, you got 25%, but any profits we make, you'll get 25%. And we'll take an inventory. And we don't need any written agreement by any attorney because my word is 100% and yours is 100%. I says, right. So from that day on, I was a quarter interest partner. Later on, when I started to have kids, I says, Pop, how about me buying half? He said, okay. Same way. Later on, when he started getting older and he couldn't drive very well and see too good, he said he wanted to retire. I said, okay, I'll buy you out. He said, fine. Now, I didn't have to have any bank financing because in those days, we had cash to deal with and checks, but we had plenty of assets. So I just wrote him a check, and all of a sudden, I'm in business.
So now you own the business. Is this the point at which you began to grow the business with the onions and the potatoes, or had you been doing that already?
We had been doing some of that already, but we decided to focus on potatoes and onions because that's what we were good at. That was our niche. Most of the wholesalers sold potatoes and onions. It's no trick. It's a common item. But I found a niche by selling to food processors like Campbell Soup, C.A. Swanson, La Choy, Banquet Canning. A lot of the ConAgra acquisitions around the country, their purchasing agents would tell their other purchasing agents that if you want the right kind of potato or the right kind of onion in the project that you're making, talk to George. And they did, and they became customers of mine. I belonged to the organizations that they did. Institute of Food Technology, I belonged to that, and you can't really get into that unless you have a college degree. But they wanted me in it pretty bad, and I told them I didn't have any college education, but they knew that I knew all the technical stuff, and I got endorsements from major packers, canners, and believe it or not, they sent me a diploma, and I still got it.
Do they? You're selling the potatoes and onions, and where? I mean, you had to know the people that grew these products too, didn't you?
I did. I used to go
Did
out.
you go out in the field and
Yes.
talk to them?
Yes,
And
yes, yes. You're absolutely correct. I would go to their conventions. In fact, I established the National Onion Packer Association because they didn't have an association. The reason I did that is I got to know now the presidents of all the companies that I wanted to sell. We had a meeting at the Red Lion downtown. It's now I think it's a Hilton. But anyhow, I was a keynote speaker. And my brother said, "How are you going to do that?" He says, "You never spoke to more than 10 people at once." I said, "We'll make an exception this time." So we had all the big shots there. And after I made my speech, when I left there, they already formed their organization all the way down from their treasurer to their secretary, you name it. And then I got the business cards of all the presidents and the manufacturers on my list, and I wrote them letters thanking them for attending, and then I asked them if they'd refer me to their purchasing agents, which they did. They endorsed me. They actually told their purchasing agents to give me some business, which they did. In fact, they were steady customers of mine all the way up to the time I retired, which was about 20 years ago.
talk to me a little bit about what you see as the secret, if you will, of your success. What is it that about the business that made you successful at doing it?
Well, that's easy. Buying and selling is very exciting no matter what you buy and sell. If you make a profit, that's much better. My dad taught me how to buy and sell when I was a small kid. So I kind of thought that's the way to go. And I thought I'm going to expand that business because my dad wasn't selling outside of Iowa. That's about as far as he went. And I'm already now dealing with canners and processors and packers who are not located in this area. They're in New York, they're in Los Angeles, you name it. So they're as close to you as a telephone. And we didn't have, we had computers in those days, but I didn't know how to run a computer. I had a telex machine. I could confirm purchases that way. I made my own contracts. I taught myself even parts of business law so that if I made a contract, I'd make it properly. And I found that I could do that. So the legal part was not a big thing. First of all, if I needed a lawyer, not all lawyers are trained in the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. So they would have to hire a subcontract with somebody else. But then it'd be too late because sometimes you need to know what's right and what's not right immediately. So I had enough ambition to say, hey, I can do all that stuff. And my dad, he wouldn't hire these people anyways because let's call it, he was frugal, or better known as cheap. If he couldn't get it at a good price, no good. Lawyers have prices of quite a bit. You know, they get $100 to $200 an hour now. My dad wouldn't pay $200 an hour for anybody. except maybe a doctor.
But you knew perishables.
I knew perishables well because I studied it by getting information from the USDA, the department, books, pamphlets, anything I could get.
So it's a combination of that and a love of buying and selling.
Well, entrepreneurship is in my blood because my dad was an entrepreneur, his father was an entrepreneur, his father's father, because in Europe is a different story. You didn't have enough money to go to the schools, and in certain parts of Europe, if you were Jewish, they didn't allow you in the schools. Like, even the United States, they had a quota on how many Jewish guys could go to med college. Now they don't have a quota. But then they did have a quota. There was a lot of discrimination going on.
Sure.
You've already read in the newspaper and saw on television on what hate does, because the Holocaust thing that hit the news recently show you what hate will do.
You know, you've been in the old market all these years, and you told me at one point that you got your education in the old market. I mean, that was your business education came out of there.
Well, it was. It was a lesson in survival, but having fun doing it. I've always had a good sense of humor. So did my dad. So did my brother. We would do everything and have fun, no matter how much stress came about. We would fight our stress by having fun with each other. My secretary was always laughing in the back office, and she'd have to close the door so she can get her work done. So I find that laughter is healing, and since our name was on the front window, there was something about it when you went someplace and people wanted to know your name and you said it was Eisenberg. They say, "Oh, you're the potato guy." Now they say you're the onion guy, or else you're the potato and onion guy. They didn't know what the hell we were, but we didn't do everything else. So by concentrating, we found that this particular niche had a fantastic future to it. And there was nobody in the United States in our type of business that just sold onions, which I did for 20 years.
Tell me a little bit about the old market and how it's changed since back then.
Okay.
I mean, you said you had a stall. You can go down in the old market now, and there's a farmer's market on Saturday where people come down and buy from farmers and so forth. But it was different in your day, right?
Well, you're right. But it was different only to a degree. The farmers that are coming down now are from not only Nebraska, but Iowa. And the stuff that they sell grew on their farm. Well, in the farmers market in Omaha, we did have farmers that had truck gardeners, they called them, and they did grow their own stuff. But when they ran out, they ran out. When I was down there, when we sold stuff in the farmer's market, when you ran out, you can get more. But they weren't necessarily growing in Nebraska or in Omaha or Council Bluffs. But then again, what's the difference if it grows in Council Bluffs or in Kansas or in Colorado? It still can come to market the next day. And sometimes Colorado sweet corn comes in and it's absolutely gorgeous stuff. So we had more flexibility in those days, and there were plenty of farmers around. But today, Vic Gutman will contract with farmers who are in the region, and the farmers also are entrepreneurs. They'll sell on a stand, near where their farm is. So he's doing a good job giving him a place to sell, and it brings back memories, because part of what they do is what we did, except we had a dual role. We were also wholesalers. So we had the best of all worlds.
The old market back in your day was full of fruit and vegetable wholesalers. Those are all gone now, right?
Wholesalers are gone because, first of all, the grocery people, small grocery people, had to close up, and they stopped buying from the wholesalers because the ones that remained joined a co-op that they formed themselves. It was called United AG Store, and they had their own warehouse where they supplied stores not only with fruits and vegetables, but with canned goods, like Hinky Dinky used to do that. So it's changed, but still, as places emptied in the market, the empty buildings were getting empty. There were pigeons flying back and forth in them.
For a while, it was not a good scene down
No. The scene was bad. However, we had our own building. Most of the wholesalers didn't own their own buildings. We were one of the exceptions.
And now look at it today. You got people living down there. Do you say to yourself, boy, the old market's coming back and this is pretty neat?
I not only say that, but I come down there and I sit in one of the chairs in front of our buildings, and I just am amazed with the people who are coming down there with their children, pushing a stroller with the babies in there. The market is really the safest place in Omaha to shop. We've got horse patrol, foot patrol, plainclothesmen, uniformed people. The helicopter and the airplane flies over all the time. We got beautiful horses out there. They got more than 10 horses. They're looking for more all the time. They got sedgeways. We got patrols that go up and down the alleys. Women are having their wedding parties there. The bridesmaid parties are there. All the excitement is going on in the market. You can go to the market and have a lot of fun and do a lot of people watching, and you leave the market 3 blocks, and downtown is dead as a doorknob at night. The market is just opening up and having fun.
Let's talk about your family a little bit. You mentioned your wife. You didn't say her name is?
Florence.
I know she has
Nuremberg, Eisenberg.
She has passed away, but you talked about Juilliard and some of the things that she had done, but was she involved in community theater and that kind of stuff here in Omaha?
My wife was involved in any activity that she thought needed help. And she, musically, she would be an accompanist to events, people getting married, things like that. She was the organist for Bethel Synagogue for about 20 years, worked for free. She taught music at Benson High for a while. She was Adelaide in Guys and Dolls, one of the most successful plays at the Omaha Community Playhouse. She was in many other plays. I know because any time she appeared, I'm sitting there close to the front seat, and I'm having a ball because she had so much talent that it turned me on to see what she could do. And all she needed is just a little hint, like Petty Point that you see in the walls here in this house. She decided that Petty Point is more difficult to do than needlepoint. It's done with a magnifying glass. She sits in the evening there and watches TV, reads the newspaper, and she's doing Petty Point. all at the same time. So she took, I had some tests made of her. She checked out in the upper 2 percentile in the country.
How many children did you have?
3 children. I have 2 sons. One is Stephen, and he has a band in Omaha called the Fishheads. And very successful. They've been here for about 25 years. And my son Joe lives in Lincoln, but he works in Omaha and Lincoln for a company called Data Serve. He's one of their top technicians on fixing computers, anything electronic, printers. He was a radio ham. When he lived in his home, we had an antenna in the back of the house. In order to have my antenna back there and not violate the code, we made sure that it was near a tree that shielded it from the street. Didn't have any problem. Anytime he interfered with my television set, I told him about it, and the next day he had a filter filtering it out so we could watch our TV. And
You have a daughter?
my daughter, she's a travel manager in Santa Rosa, California, travel agency, and doing very well there.
You know, one of the questions that I did not ask you, and I should, you had this business for all these years. You've told me you've been retired now for 20 years. Mm-hmm. You're 82, is that right?
I'm 85.
85 now.
85, going on 18.
There you go. Did you sell your business to somebody? Or?
Well, it's a frequently asked question. And I decided that I'm not going to sell the business because it's saleable, but I tried to picture in my mind who's going to be doing it, and I couldn't come up with a name or a person. And I thought, well, if anybody in the industry, the fruit and vegetable industry, wants to buy it, they'll want to see the books. They'll want to see who I buy from, who I sell to, and why. And even though I'm not ashamed of it, but I know that a deal is not a deal until the money crosses the table. So there's nothing to say that they couldn't say, well, we'll pass. And here I've given him maybe 30 years of my life in a couple hours just for some cash. I don't want his money. Yeah. In fact, I'll just redeem my stock, which I own it all, and put up a for lease sign on the building, which I did, and lease the building out and just let the past that I had dissipate. And I called all my suppliers and all my customers, and I wrote them a letter, and I told them what I'm going to do and why, and I gave each and every one of them the source of supply that they need to contact directly, and just tell them that I'm retiring, which they already knew, and they'll probably give you some good business. And I found out later that they did that, and some of them wrote me nice letters and says, you're the only guy that we ever heard of that would do something like that. You know, here I open up my books and say, you don't need me anymore. And I went out professionally, conducted myself that way. I tell people you don't have to lie, cheat, or steal to make money in any business.
Well, George Eisenberg, you've had a wonderful, wonderful career, business, and I thank you again for being a part of this program, and I wish you the very best.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure having you here to interview me, and it's really a pleasure because I don't mind reviewing what I used to do and sharing it with somebody, particularly people that understand business.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure.